Thank you, Maestro, for taking the time to do this. Today we're going to be going over the American Heritage Concert we have coming up on May 14th. So, with it being next week, how are you feeling with performing the last concert of our 2021-2022 season?
I'm very excited. It was difficult year for us, and at the same time really exciting to be able to start live concerts again. And this is the last concert of the season is sort of a climax for our activities during the year, and it is also one of the biggest undertakings for an orchestra, because it's actually our first regular concert with a typical symphonic repertoire, with one soloist, with classical music, and with a big symphony orchestra. The first two concerts we performed were without soloists, for instance, and with small orchestras. Then we had our fundraiser, the cabaret, very successful and unique in terms of the type of music we played, because it was a combination of classical and jazz and pop, also a beautiful undertaking. And now we start, our normal operations as a symphony orchestra.
Great. So, to go into the repertoire of our American Heritage Concert, we're featuring Rip Van Winkle, Concert Overture by George Whitefield Chadwick, Violin Concerto No. 1 in D major by Florence Price, and Symphony in E minor, Opus 32, Gaelic, by Amy Beach. So, before we go into what is inside of these compositions, could you define the differences between overture, concerto, and symphony?
Yes. Regarding a musical form, they are quite similar.
Mm-hmm.
But the first difference is the character. An overture, as the title suggests always, is an opening, is as an opera, concert opera. It is not long, it is usually 10 minutes long, 10, 15 minutes, not longer, and serves as a kind of an appetizer. When you have a meal, you have an appetizer first. And then you have a concerto, which is an opportunity to showcase a star. In this case, it's Jin Kang, our violinist, who performs Florence Price's concerto. And then you had an event after the intermission where the orchestra can show off, can show their possibilities and their virtuosity. It is usually also the longest form on the menu. So it's kind of like a main dish. That's a kind of structure which was used for at least 100 years, I think. It was nothing typical. For instance, some people think it's from times immemorial, it's from 19th century or classical Beethoven times. For instance. No, in Beethoven times the structure of concerts was really strikingly different. Mainly because concert halls were not so available as they are now. So Beethoven, for instance, when he got hold of a concert hall, he used it to the maximum extent. He organized marathon concerts, like 7 hours long. But our concert is only 2 hours long. Okay, sometimes with the intermission, sometimes even shorter. And I think it's an established structure that allows the orchestra to show what they prepared, and also the audience to enjoy it fully.
Great. So, with this program, how did you come up with these works? And would you talk about the challenge presented from performing pieces outside of a standard repertoire, and remark on what a standard repertoire would look like?
So I was looking for American repertoire first of all, because I feel that still in this country we don't have enough opportunities to listen to American music. And what I mean is not only contemporary American music, which yes, it is featured in festivals, for instance, but some music from the past that was undeservedly forgotten, like works by Florence Price, which were discovered quite by an accident, for instance, and also many people who study music know about George Chadwick, but hardly ever they have opportunity to listen to his music in live concerts. The same applies to Amy Beach, who was a famous pianist, a prodigy, but during her life the possibilities of having her music performed were limited. And even later in the 20th century, even now, you can hardly see her name on posters.
Mm-hmm. So, what would like comparing it to a standard repertoire? What would you say standard repertoire would similarly look like?
So, a standard repertoire would be quite similar in structure. Standard repertoire will start with an overture, there will be a concerto and then symphony, but you would have different names. Like you could have an overture by Mozart, then a symphony then a concerto by let's say Brahms, and then a symphony by Beethoven. So the big classics, they're always the same names. Great music, fantastic to be performed for Tchaikovsky, for instance. I love Tchaikovsky. I love Dvorak. But you can find very interesting works of similar quality. Like the symphony by Amy Beach is by far so complex, comparable to the best achievements of European composers of her time. She was active in Europe too. She traveled through Europe. Chadwick was educated in Leipzig. You can hear it in his music. He's being enchanted by music by Brahms, by Wagner. He really adored Brahms and Wagner, but did it in his own original way, which is fascinating. So it is, in a way, the concert is in a way ordinary, means overture, concerto, symphony, but filled with music that you have to come to our concert to listen to.
Exactly. So for our overture, we're doing the Rip Van Winkle overture by George Whitefield Chadwick. So could you talk about why you chose this piece and maybe the importance it'll have to the Catskill, New York region?
I think some kids will know the answer because they know the legend, they know the fairy tale of Rip Van Winkle, the sailor who went to sleep and woke up 100 years later in a completely different environment. And the story, told first by Washington Irving in 1809, if I remember correctly, is so fascinating because also is based in the Catskill Mountains. It's here. We are in the foothills of Catskills, so it's quite of a local story. I think everybody would know it, and it's pretty funny also in the musical setting.
So, you prepared a new edition of the Rip Van Winkle overture. So, how did you approach creating this new preparation?
Well, in case of music which is from outside the standard repertoire, we somehow always encounter similar problems. Because it's not very popular, it is not well edited, or the composer did not have time to proofread the manuscripts, and later something that was published. And in case of Rip Van Winkle, what I saw is that the score available is full of some errors, but some question marks too. So what I did, I took that score. I also looked into the manuscript of the original version, which he wrote in Leipzig because the piece was actually written for his graduation. He was very young when he wrote it, and later he reworked the overture, embellishing it, adding some other additional instruments like xylophone, for instance, which wasn't in the original version. But the music really requires some detective work sometimes, and the conductors are often detectives, like they are investigating. Is it really what the composer wanted to say? There's something missing in the music. There's sometimes the harmony requires some clarification, and you need to change a few notes. It's a delicate matter, of course, because it's quite a liberty to change music, written by another composer. But conductors in the past did it, especially those conductors who were composers. And I'm fortunate also to be a composer, so I think I can sometimes see and hear the intention the composer had and correct the already printed music, which is also important for the creative interpretation, because you can actually write a lot of details into musicians' parts, which makes it easier for them to understand the music, to understand the whole. It's a delicate process, but it's an important one. Also, there are, some editions prepared in the 19th century use a slightly different notation. We think of a musical notation that is also always the same. It changed a lot. In the past, musicians were more used to improvise, for instance, or to for instance, there was not many rehearsals in the past, so we don't have measured numbers. You need to put the measure numbers nowadays because you rehearse, or else the conductor stops and say that you need to do so and so in bar 122. In the past, it was just playing through the piece and then performing it. The orchestra musicians in the past were much more self-sufficient. Also in the interpretation, the education was different. So nowadays, the editions are much more precise.
I'm excited to hear what you have in store for us. So, moving on to Amy Beach's Symphony in E minor, Opus 32.
My favorite.
Gaelic. It's a symphony broken down into 4 movements. The first movement is set to a dangerous sea crossing that the Irish endured to get to America, and the preceding movements also have a great deal of Celtic and Irish influence. Would you be able to remark on how, even though this can be seen as an ode to Irish heritage, the importance of recognizing this as American heritage?
As far as I know, Amy Beach had an opportunity to meet Dvorak, Antonin Dvorak, the famous Czech composer, when he taught in America. He was employed as a professor of composition for some time, and he encouraged his students and all American composers to base their works on American heritage, to look for folk tunes, to music of some ethnic groups which were not shown properly around. Music in times of Dvorak, the classical music, was dominated by German composers, and he insisted that it should be more national. And we can hear it in his New World Symphony. There are some American tunes. And Amy Beach, I think she took it literally, and she took the particular, very beautiful Irish heritage, Irish Americans, which at her times were persecuted, were frowned upon in the society, from the high society. She was part of this high echelons of the society, and yet she took those tunes, songs, jigs, and beautifully embellished it in beautiful harmony and put it in her own symphony, which is so lively because of that. It's one of my favorite works from Romantic repertoire. I discovered it a year ago, and I was enchanted by that music. It's really brilliant. It's comparable to works from, say, by our Romantic composer, Polish Romantic composers, Mieczysław Karłowicz. Also, his first symphony is in E minor. It's the same key. When I discovered it, it was very close to my heart.
Great. So, to our third composer, moving on to Florence Price. Her compositions were found in a dilapidated house outside of Chicago, in a tucked away dry spot years after she passed away. So many of her compositions were so close to being lost forever. So with our featured guest soloist, Ergin Khan, she was the first person to record this concerto of Florence Price. Can you tell us more about Price's composition from your perspective as the conductor, as well as what it means to you to have Ergin Khan performing with us?
I first encountered concerto by Florence Price in Ergin Khan's recording. And I fell in love in her playing and also with the concerto. Some time ago, we are looking for music by African American composers for some of our projects, and I discovered symphonic works by Florence Price that are available on the internet. You can listen to her maybe 4 symphonies, if I'm not mistaken. She was very prolific. And that's quite a story, that discovery of her concerto along other works which were unknown before. It was in 2009, and so for such a long time nobody really heard about her violin concertos. She wrote two beautiful violin concertos, virtuosic. She was really knowledgeable, I mean Florence Price, about how to write for violin and how to write it in a very romantic way. You can trace her inspirations to Brahms, you can trace the inspirations to Tchaikovsky, and just try to imagine this type of virtuosity using the tunes which are similar to blues. That symphony starts like a work, it's like a blues. So it's black American music, beautiful, so tuneful, full of very interesting rhythms. And yet you have this virtuosity, violin virtuosity. It's really brilliant, a brilliant work.
Great. So, coming towards the end of our interview, is there any final remarks you have about upcoming repertoire or concert?
So I think that American Heritage concert is just the beginning. It's the end of the season, but it's also just a beginning of the preparation for new seasons. In each of the seasons I will try to include some interesting works which were unknown before, not only for the audience in this region, but in general in America. So for that we'll cooperate with libraries, with universities. We'll try to locate very interesting and very rarely performed works to make Oneonta and the Catskill Symphony Orchestra a cultural hub for this region, and not only for the state as well.
Great. Well, May 14th, we'll be at SUNY Oneonta's Alumni Fieldhouse to be performing, and this has me even more excited than I was before. I'm really, it was great to sit down and talk with you about this, and thank you for taking the time. Very excited.
Thank you for having me.